As you can see, we have three 1 amp circuit breakers mounted on our panel. Breaker 1 is a TMC1 with the M1 trip curve. Breaker 2 is a 1 amp TMC with the F1 trip curve. And breaker 3 is our new electronic ECE circuit breaker. We also have two current selectors. One is a 1/2 amp load, the other is a 1.5 amp load. We have two circuit selects, one for capacitive load and one for short circuit. Also on the board we have our Phoenix contact step power supply, and we have a DC amperes and voltage readings. The first condition will be with circuit breaker 1. We have it set at the 1/2 amp load setting, and we will apply the capacitive load. You'll notice the breaker does not trip, but the amperage does ramp up to close to 1 amp. We will now apply the short circuit condition to breaker 1. As you will notice, the power supply goes into shutdown mode and the amperage ramps up above 3 amps, and the breaker trips. We'll now apply the same conditions to breaker 2. As this has the fast time delay, the breaker will trip at the capacitive load. We will now apply the short circuit condition to circuit breaker 2. We will now apply the 1.5 amp load setting to breaker 1. As this is 150% overload, the breaker will trip. We will now apply the same current rating to breaker 2. Again, this is 150% overload. We will now apply the same conditions to our ECE electronic circuit breaker. I'll hit the capacitive load and you will notice the LED light on the ECE will flicker. That is accepting the capacitive load and the breaker does not trip. We will now apply the short circuit condition to the ECE electronic circuit breaker. You will notice on the amp meter that the current does not go above 1.8 amps. This is the current limiting feature of the ECE. You'll also notice that the ECE breaker will trip before the power supply goes into a shutdown mode. We'll now apply the 24-volt DC signal to reset the ECE. We'll now apply the 1.5 amp load to the ECE breaker. This is again 150% overload condition. The breaker immediately shuts down in 3 seconds. For more information on the ECE electronic circuit breaker, please visit phoenixcontact.com/ECE.